This amazing event raises great questions that are almost mystical in nature. What is chance? What is luck? What is fate? What makes you so sure you're going to make it home tonight? I was 46 years old the day I walked into that cockpit. I had the world ahead of me. I was a captain on a major U.S. airline. I had a beautiful, healthy family, loving wife, great future. And at 4 o'clock, I'm trying to stay alive. It's almost for me a religious experience to take an airliner into the air. I say sometimes to my younger co-pilots, I said, do you realize that we're going through the air at 8 miles a minute? Do you realize we're covering 4,000 miles in one day? My mother used to say that instead of saying mommy and daddy, I said plane. I built models when I was growing up, bombers and transports with glue and plastic. And then I'd go to airports. I'd watched airplanes fly and I'd watch pilots circle the airplanes. I really wanted to fly airplanes. I had a burning desire. I mean, I got sick in the mornings. I got dry heaves. I wanted it so badly. October of 1966, my dream was realized. I got my wings and became an Air Force pilot. I started as a TCA. We're great for acronyms in this business, but TCA means Training Check Airman in 1989, April 1st, April Fool's Day. Pilots have a check ride every year. We go out to our training facilities for our respective airlines. In our case, United's at Denver, Colorado.
Every year?
Every year. It's an annual requirement. An emergency evacuation training and ditching training and all kind of training that has to do with the safety of the aircraft in terms of an accident, what you do, how you get passengers out. But you also have to do a host of check maneuvers. We get into a simulator.
So you're throwing pilots into situations where bad things happen.
Absolutely. All right. Flaps won't come down, gear gets stuck, you'll have engine failures, you'll have hydraulic failures, you'll have electrical failures, explosions, fire. Things are going to happen, you don't know what they're going to be, and you just have to deal with them. It's a sweat box type situation. Ode to sweat. You're bolted to the ground. But this is very real. You're working very, very hard, and you're exhausted when you get out. This is how we train these pilots so that they've been exposed to it all. Way outside of what you're ever going to experience in a career, but you're ready for it if it ever happens. July 19th, 1989, I was working with a crew of pilots that I was checking out. We had worked 5 days together. We were going to go home for 3 days off. I did the paperwork and went over to Stapleton Airport, Denver Stapleton. I went to look for the first flight back to my home in Chicago. And as I walked down that B concourse, the first one I came across was a B-7, Boeing 727 aircraft. And its time of departure was 5 minutes prior to an airplane at the next gate, B-9. Flight 232, also going to Chicago, and it was a DC-10. The 727 left 5 minutes earlier. And for some reason, depends on whether you believe in fate, luck, or God, I guess, I did the further walk and I went to the DC-10 and got on that airplane. I was seated in 5F, which turns out to be the last seat in first class. On the right side, I had a window seat. Flight was uneventful. I think we were just about completely full. We took off, and we climbed altitude, and they served lunch. The tray was removed, and I asked for a cup of coffee. And shortly after, there was a loud, muffled explosion. It was, in fact, in the back of the aircraft. Very loud and very pronounced. The aircraft yawed, which is a severe yank to the right. The whole fuselage of the aircraft went very sharply to the right. That coffee cup is now empty. Its contents are in the saucer and it's all over the table linen. And my rear end, which is sitting in the middle of a leather seat, is now up against the armrest to the left. It was abrupt and violent. 10 seconds, I would say, of airframe shuddering. And then after the 10 seconds elapsed, there was, it just stopped. It was smooth. But the right wing would bank to the right, steeper and steeper and steeper. 10, 15, 20 degrees of bank. There's a golden rule in our business, and it's probably not written anywhere. We will never intentionally take you in excess of 30 degrees of wing bank. It's considered bad public relations. It scares people. This airplane got up over 40 degrees of bank. The passenger address announcement came from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, we have shut down the number 2 engine, and we will be a few minutes late arriving at O'Hare. And he hung up. The DC-10 has 3 engines. The one under the left wing is numbered number 1. The one in the tail is number 2. The one under the right wing is number 3. Ladies and gentlemen, we have shut down the number 2 engine, and we will be a few minutes late arriving at O'Hare. They have shut down the engine in the tail of the aircraft. Because it doesn't sit out away from the body of the aircraft, it doesn't cause the airplane to yaw left or right. It doesn't cause the airplane to bank. Everything I saw aerodynamically said to me that it was the right engine was our culprit. Yet he said it was the number 2 engine they shut down. We were at 37,000 feet above sea level. The airplane will fly all day long on the remaining 2 engines. However, it can't do it at that altitude. It's lost 1/3 of its power capability. The nature of our atmosphere is as you get lower in it, the air becomes more dense and more oxygenated. So by dropping down at 20,000 feet or so, there's enough oxygen to fly all day long till you run out of gas. The problem that I saw was that when I looked out the window, the body of the aircraft is like so, and by looking at it reference to the horizon, I could tell that we were climbing and not descending. We're going the wrong way.
Do people around you know you're a pilot?
No, I'm in civilian clothes.
What's happening in the first class cabin?
Well, there was a bit of consternation in the beginning and some gasps when the explosion happened. And then they heard the announcement, which had a calming effect, like, oh, okay. But I was discomforted by the fact that the information given and what I was seeing didn't match up.
What's wrong with this picture?
What's wrong with this picture? Then I started to notice power changes, substantial power changes. The right wing would go down, and then you hear power coming up. The wing would come back up somewhat. We begin to turn in the direction the down wing goes. So if the right wing goes down, we turn right. Now the sun is coming through the windows on the other side of the aircraft. I'm the oldest of 8 kids, and one of the things that I developed out of that upbringing was a thing I call people radar. And at 100 yards, if I see your white-haired grandmother getting off an airplane clutching her ticket and she's in distress, I swear to God I'll see her. Or I'll see your 2-year-old get away from you and maybe head toward the escalator in harm's way. I mean, I just see those things. But it's useless unless you somehow act to help. I saw the flight attendant that was working my side of first class. Her name is Jan Murray. She's obviously concerned and distressed. I reached out and I just touched her in the arm as she went by, and I said, Jan, don't worry about this. This thing flies fine on 2 engines. We just simply need to get to a lower altitude. We're going to be fine. She just gave me a kind of a focused look and said, oh no, Denny. Both the pilots are trying to fly the airplane, and the captain has told us that we have lost all our hydraulics. DC-10s must have hydraulics to fly them, period. There's nothing you'll find in any McDonnell Douglas publications or the FAA-approved manuals that will address the loss of all hydraulics in a DC-10. Why? Because the DC-10, like all airplanes, are designed to a factor of 10 to the minus 9th. That problems such as this will not happen to a factor of 1 in a billion. There was no procedure for this, and therefore the outcome as we could perceive it was not good. A flight attendant is not a pilot, and I said, would you go back to the cockpit, tell the captain there's a DC-10 training check airman back here. If there's anything that I can do to assist, I'd be happy to do so. And when she came out of the cockpit, she came around the corner, saw me standing there, and she stopped dead in her tracks and just went. I opened the door. The scene to me as a pilot is unbelievable. Both the pilots were in short sleeve shirts, the tendons being raised in their forearm, their knuckles were white. They had turned the control yoke, the yoke we use as a wheel, all the way against the stops. We're asking the airplane's left wing to go down, and the right wing keeps falling. We want the nose to go down, we push forward. They are pushing for all they're worth, and the first officer was slouched in his seat, and he has his knee on it to exert more pressure, trying to force it down. But the airplane continues to climb. And I looked at the second officer's panel. All the hydraulic gauges indicated 0 quantity and 0 pressure. And the captain said, go back and see if anything's moving. If there's any of these flight controls were responding to their inputs. If you remember as a kid, you know, you had your hand outside the window of a car, it was driving down the road at say 40 miles an hour. But if you raised your hand, ailerons, elevators, which are in the tail to control the pitch, and rudders, which control the yaw, those act in the same way as your hand did in a car. If I ask for the left aileron to go up, the right aileron goes down. They'll never both be up. They just aren't built that way. This way or that way. It's yin and it's yang. Just back of the second door, there's a spot in the coach cabin where you can have a look out a window right down the length of each wing. And I looked out the wing and they're both floating up. Impossible if you're pressurized with hydraulics. It can't happen. Scary proposition.
We have no hydraulic fluid, which means we have no elevator control, almost none, and very little aileron control. I have serious doubts about making the airport. Have you got someplace near there that we might be able to ditch? Unless we get control of this airplane, we're going to put it down wherever it happens to be.
United 232 Heavy, roger, standby 1. And United 232 Heavy, did you get the souls on board count?
Never mind. Hey, right now, we don't even have time to let go to call the gal. United 232 souls on board,
United 232, say again?
292.
Roger, thank you.
This airplane had this inherent tendency to want to roll on its back to the right, it seemed. And the only way that Al could have any control of it was he'd reach up and he grabbed the throttle, the gas pedal for the left engine under the left wing, and he pulled it back to idle. And he'd take the one for the right engine, the wing that was falling, and he'd push it to its maximum power. And that power setting slowly but surely would bring that right wing back up again. You had to pull it, modulate it to try to keep the wings level. Terribly hard thing to do. If you were driving your car with power steering, the engine stalled, where you've tried to steer it to a stop. If you can imagine that force and take it up a factor of 4, that's what it took to move these controls between the two of them. Tremendous physical exertion. I wasn't doing anything. I said, "Captain, would you like me to work your throttles for you?" And I stood between the two pilots, leaning forward, and I began to operate the throttles. That left the captain only with the yoke to fight. I was in foreign country. This is places nobody had been before. We didn't know what it was going to take. We just had to learn as we went. So basically what we did is we started with a box this big, trying to make it this big so we could land. These 3 men were not known to me. They were all Seattle-based, and I'm out of Chicago. At the time, I think we had 7,500 pilots on the airline, so we didn't know each other by name, face, or reputation. The only thing that was controlling his aircraft, in fact, was his throttles, although I don't think it was quite clear to him at that time that that's the only thing that was controlling. He transferred to a perfect stranger the control of his aircraft. Now that is an amazing thing if you will take into consideration that pilots don't give up control very easily. As I stood there beginning to operate the throttles, he reached over his right shoulder with his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Al Haynes." And he introduced himself to me in this incredible environment we were in. And I gratefully reached forward and I shook his hand and I said, "Hi, I'm Denny Fitch."
First officer is struggling with the yoke.
Correct.
What good is that doing?
You ask any pilot, no matter what he's flown, whether it's been fighters, light airplanes, or what has always saved the day for you when all else has gone to pot? What it always comes down to is your stick and your rudder skills. This is how we get up, this is how we get down, and we've done it thousands and thousands of times. This is what we fall back on. This always works, except today it's not working. The second issue is, how do we know it's not working? How do we know it's not giving you something? Maybe it's giving you this much, but it's contributory. In other words, it's positive toward the outcome. How do you know? You can't afford to leave it ignored. So he is working this area. He's covering that base. We're working as 3 people on the same mission. You let go of it if you're the pilot. The first rule of any event we have in air is somebody fly the aircraft, keeping the wings level, under control, while whatever problems we're having are dealt with. Somebody fly the airplane. But how do you fly an airplane without controls? If you were sitting in a chair at altitude and watch us fly by, we would look like a sine wave. 1 minute we were climbing, then the next minute we were descending, then the next minute we were climbing, then we were descending. What's known in aerodynamic terms as a phugoid. And the phugoid was going up and down 2,500 feet per minute on average. Every time we went through one of these up and downs, we had a net loss of altitude and we were getting closer and closer to the ground. When we fly an airplane, we try to maintain perfect balance. Smooth air, you can take your hands off and the airplane goes right where you want it to go. The wings are level, you don't climb, you don't descend. Everything is perfect, it's in harmony. In this case, engine number 2 is out of the equation. So we've lost basically a third of the thrust capability of this aircraft. We can do nothing more because the controls don't work anymore. They're gone. The airplane says, "I want back what I had before. How can I get it?" Okay, if we go down, we will build airspeed and we will get back to that harmonic situation I liked. So the nose falls and the airplane starts down, 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 looking for that speed. Speed builds up. The only problem is the process overshoots. Now it's doing 290. It says, "Wait a minute, that's too fast. How can I get back to 270? Oh, I gotta go back up. That'll bleed the speed back." So then we start up the hill. But it does it too much, and now we get down around 220. Oh, too slow. Let's go back down and get that speed again. The airplane was in harmony at 270 knots. It wants to go back to 270 knots. And in the effort to get it, it overshoots continuously, going too fast going down, too slow going up, and it sets in place this phugoid, this sine wave action, getting lower and lower after every occasion.
Every cycle brought...
Every cycle brought us lower, yes. We had up and down at 2,500 feet per minute. We had these great variations in airspeed, and the airplane was continually turning to the right. Now, this is not the methodology you want to come in for a landing. We're trying to get this wing level and keep it there. And how can we stop this up and down at the same time? It's a twofold problem. I don't want to get any closer to the Earth. We need to buy time to figure this thing out. We need to buy time to find out what this airplane can do. Because, you know, quite frankly, in the previous 25 years to this event, there never has been a survivable loss of flight controls accident. Nobody's ever survived. If you're sitting at the gate at an airport, you can see an airplane that has engines under the wing. Maybe the wind is causing them to rotate around. Well, those blades you're watching at the very front of the engine are what's known as the fan stage. It's got a 300-pound titanium disc in the middle that's holding onto 36 fan blades. It's rotating up around 16,500 RPM. Metallurgical failure, that piece flies out. In a quarter of a second, all the blades, this mass inertia, exits through the side of the engine and out the side of the tail of the aircraft, throwing shrapnel everywhere. Those high-velocity parts impact upon the tail surface of the aircraft. They puncture through at great force. Beneath that surface, which you can't see, are hydraulic lines of very strong stainless steel tubing. Shrapnel basically sever all the lines. All the hydraulic fluid goes overboard, so we've lost all the hydraulic systems in a quarter of a second.
They're redundant hydraulic systems?
Correct. There's 3 systems. Say the elevator, one of the panels that move up and down in the back of the thing. 1 and 2 is on this piece. There's a separate elevator that's powered by 3 and 2. There's 1 and 2 here, 2 and 3 here. Okay? If I lose system 1, I still have number 2 powering this system, and I have 2 and 3 powering this one. If I lose 2, 2 goes away, but number 3 is not working out here. So I've always got something. On the face of it, good Lord, I mean, that's amazing. Triple redundancy, you're pushing the envelope, right? To expect anything worse than that to happen. Well, you know, there's Murphy's Law.
Are there any cables?
No cables. If you look at the flight control surfaces of these airplanes, they're big as barn doors. They're huge. You have to use hydraulic advantage to operate these massive flight controls, both in weight and to fight the air forces that are against them. Well, if I can't have manual, then what do? Well, how am I going to replace the manual back up? Well, you put more hydraulic systems in there with redundancy. It's triple redundant. It's, you know, that's good enough, you know. We have resources at our command through radio. We can get patched in with a phone to what's called SAM. It's our maintenance people out in San Francisco. They know this airplane cold. They know all the systems. They have all the technical manuals. They have everything at their disposal. And if there's a backdoor way of pulling a circuit breaker or something to do, they can see this backdoor way of helping you out. The problem they were having was that whenever the engineer, Dudley Dvorak, called them, Dudley said, "We have lost all our hydraulics." And they said, "Okay, we've got a communications problem. That can't be the case." 1 in a billion. Hard to believe. It's almost impossible to believe. Maybe no hydraulics in 1 system or no hydraulics in 2 systems. They couldn't believe there was no hydraulics in 3 systems. So Dudley said, "Listen to me. Number 1 hydraulic quantity, 0. Got it? Number 2 hydraulic quantity, 0. Number 3 hydraulic quantity, 0. Later on in post-accident, they said, "We didn't know what to say to you because we were talking to 4 dead men." As designed, the airplane was no longer controllable. Two problems we talked about, the airplane going up and down the phugoid and the airplane's roll tendency. It was an immensely difficult thing for me to operate the throttles to mitigate both those issues at the same time. So I was looking over all the controls and switches and everything that I had knowledge of in the aircraft, and they had executed just about everything I think I would have attempted. But in the DC-10, if the hydraulic systems fail, there's always an emergency methodology to get the landing gear to free fall done. They weigh many tons, and if we can simply open the doors, they usually just free fall out and they lock into place. Now the byproduct of that's a hydraulic system. When the gear is stored and they're up in the airplane, we've got trapped fluid in some of these lines. And I thought, if we could get the landing gear down, the very motion of the gear going down forces that fluid back into the reservoirs. Somehow, some chance, some of that fluid could be recovered, not go overboard, then perhaps they could get back the control of the aircraft. And we talked about it. But there's a golden rule in aviation. It's kind of an unspoken rule, but it basically says this: if you ever find yourself upstairs with minimum control of your aircraft, don't change its configuration. In other words, don't put flaps down, don't put gear down, just leave it the way it is. You know the devil you have now. If you change, you may not like the devil you get. You may lose control of the aircraft completely. So we had a discussion. Now, what are the merits of putting the gear down? If we put the landing gear down, are we going to lose it completely and the airplane's going to be a smoking hole in Iowa? We don't know. Is it better to land in a cornfield with your landing gear up or your landing gear down? There's not much test data on this. Is it better to land you on a 4-lane highway with the landing gear up or the landing gear down? There was interstate highways below us that we could have taken shots at. Is that a good idea? We don't know. Finally, the decision maker, Al Haynes, said, let's put it down. I don't think control-wise it can get any worse than it is right now. And besides, if it's down, it'll be a shock absorber when we hit. And so I executed the procedure to drop the gear. And we never did get back. The fluid evidently went right overboard again. But it seemed to me that the airplane was a little bit more stable with the landing gear down. I took my hands off the throttles long enough to put the harness and the seatbelts on. And when I reached back forward, I put my hands back on the knobs. It struck me like a thunderclap. Dear God, I have 296 lives literally in my two hands. As I walked into cockpit and I took in the pilot's behavior, the aircraft's behavior, the status of the engineer's panel, the first thing that strikes your mind is, dear God, I'm going to die this afternoon. The only question that remains is, how long is it going to take Iowa to hit me? That's a very compelling moment in your life. Life was good, and here I am 46 years old and I'm going to die. My wife was my high school sweetheart. Loved her dearly, and I had 3 beautiful children. Where are we right now? Are we in love or are we at war? I talked to her the night before, and the last thing she said to me was, I love you, hurry home, I love you. And with that knowledge and that peace, I was ready to die that day if I had to. I knew I loved them to death. Eliminate the pitch phugoid. Keep the altitude, keep that right wing up. Guts, intuition, whatever you want to call it. I'm just trying to find the right magic and trying to make these variations smaller and smaller and smaller to where they're manageable for an approach and landing. The problem was there was no constant. When you think you had one solved, the other issue would kick in, the wing would drop. One would not suffice for both. It was an intuitive response after a period of time. I had a sense that the airplane was going to do something. I had a sense that it was going to go in another direction. And knowing that it was reaching that point again, I would be proactive in my throttle control, getting in tune with the airplane, to read the instrumentation and benchmarking things that happen at these certain points and try to lead it. Before the airspeed got to where it wanted to be and the airplane on its own would start up, I'd see it getting close, and I'd put the power in maximum power, get the nose back up sooner and begin to climb. And then the speed started to decay backwards. That's it, power's off. Intervening before the natural process took place in a phugoid, we stayed a little higher than we normally would have. buying time. As long as we could, we kept the airplane up. The right engine, the direction of the turn, I put more power on than I would the left engine. That would keep the wing up, and if you keep a wing fairly level, the airplane will not turn. If I allowed the wing to drop, then I could let it turn right. The phugoid caused me to take power all the way off and all the way on, and that complicated it immensely. It just became like the airplane was an extension of me, and I could feel these stimuli coming at me before I actually felt them or saw them. It was work in progress all the way to the ground. I don't think I ever perfected it. It just got better little bit by little bit. There is a possibility that we can make this survivable.
You were entertaining all kinds of places to land, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the captain was given choices by air traffic control. Des Moines is a possibility. Lincoln, Nebraska is a possibility. Omaha is a possibility. But in Captain Haynes' judgments, the behaviors he was seeing of the aircraft, the math just didn't add up at the rate it was losing altitude. We would hit the ground prior to reaching any of those places. The decision was made to try to make it to Sioux City. That radar controller locally took over, and they were pointing out interstate highways. If you guys can't make the airport, here's some options for you. There's an interstate highway that runs north-south. There's one that runs east-west in case an airport no longer was viable. If you were to look at the track that we flew, we did 4 complete right 360 turns, and we did 1 left 180-degree turn. It was really questionable whether we were going to be able to keep it flying straight at Sioux City or not. One of the things that we wanted to know was where were we? The navigation station at the Sioux City Airport that tells us how far we are and what direction the airport is from the aircraft. Unfortunately, it was out of service that day, so we didn't have any onboard navigation capability to the airport. We were talking to the approach controller, and that gave us some positioning. As we got closer to the airport, one of the things that I realized by all this experimentation was that there were certain speeds that if I got near these speeds, I had the maximum capability of controlling the airplane. A normal DC-10 would approach the airport at about 150 miles per hour. I could not slow this airplane safely below 250 miles an hour. We were 100 miles an hour faster than normal.
And United 232 Heavy, if you can't make the airport, sir, there is an interstate that runs north to south to the east side of the airport. It's a 4-lane interstate.
We're just passing it right now. We're going to crash the airport.
United 232 Heavy, roger. And advise when you get the airport in sight.
Got the runway in sight. We'll be with you very shortly. Thanks a lot for your help.
We were perhaps about 6 minutes out. We saw the runway by then. We were making the descent into the airport, and because of the high speed we were going over the ground, we had to make a steep descent. They said you can land on runway 31. We didn't have the altitude or the maneuverability to maneuver to that runway. As a matter of fact, the controller said, "You're clear to land on any runway," to Captain Haynes, and Al's retort was basically a laugh. He said, "Ha, you want to make it a runway, huh?" When we finally saw the airport, we were almost directly lined up with 2-2, and that was a godsend. We didn't have to maneuver the aircraft. We were already lined up for a straight-in approach into that runway. They put a big yellow X on it so pilots know that that's a closed runway. You don't land on this. But that runway was 6,600 feet long. It was a World War II runway. It's been closed for years. Cracked, crumbling, but boy, it was in the right direction, and that's what we needed. At 330,000 pounds going over 250 miles an hour with no way to stop it, we don't have any brakes. We had to touch down as close to the end of the runway as possible so we could use all the runway ahead of us to slow down. But the beautiful thing was at the end of the runway was a wide open field that was laced in corn, and I thought, perfect. We may leave the runway, but if we can go into that cornfield and use all that plant matter to slow us down and stop the airplane, we're going to open 8 doors. Slides are going to inflate. 296 souls are going to slide down, and we're going to the nearest saloon, and I'm buying. 400 feet above the ground or so. Captain Haynes looked at the airspeed indicator, realized we were doing about 220 knots. How fast we could be going when we touched the wheels on the runway was about 195 knots. The tires were going to explode, or the casings were going to come off them or something. He simply said to me, "Pull the power off, slow us down." I knew the nose would pitch down. I knew the right wing would fall severely. All I had time to say to him was, "I can't, that's what's holding your wing up." When I thought we were right there, that we were right above the runway, that we were just about to touch down, I was going to chop both the throttles all the way back to idle to start to slow down. But then I looked over to see incredibly high sink rate, 1,800 feet per minute toward the ground, 3 times in excess of the structural capability of the landing gear. So I firewalled both the engine, took both the throttles, and I just pushed them to the full extent my arms would allow, trying to get maximum power out of both of them, hoping to pull the nose up and at the very last minute to arrest that sink rate so we didn't hit the runway that hard. But there just wasn't time. We hit so hard that my hands flew off the throttles. It was like a giant hand was behind my head, and it slammed my face down into the radio below me. And my face impacted on that, and I bounced back up like a jack-in-a-box. And for some reason why, I don't know, I looked left through a veil of blood because blood was running over my eyes. The captain's profile, corn stalks going by. I had an instantaneous thought that it's true, they really do grow the corn that tall in Iowa. Captain in a DC-10 sits about 22 feet above the ground. They don't grow it that tall. That impact had taken out our landing gear. There was this terrible sounds, tearing of metal, G-loads, this yaw to the right. And simultaneous with that change of direction was this sensation that something was like drop kicking your backside. You could feel yourself coming up and over, head over heels. The windshield went completely green and brown. Split second, cold air blowing on my left shoulder. The windshield lightened for a split second, darkened a second time. Heat and humidity and violence beyond any words I could ever hope to put forth. My next recognition was being still. I was upside down. I had mud in my eyes and my ears. I couldn't hear, I couldn't see, I couldn't move. I could feel the blood flowing up my face to my ears and up to my hair. Tremendous pain. My ribs were broken and they'd punctured my right lung cavity and stuck in there. Just couldn't get a breath of air. I've got to stay conscious. If I lose consciousness, I'm probably going to lose it. I have to fight to stay conscious. We ended up in 4 distinct pieces. We landed with the right wing down. The wing ruptured open, and 11,000 pounds of kerosene came out and started on fire.
The wing that dipped on landing, that was the wing that was always going down?
The right wing, yeah. The damn thing always wanted to go down. The engine itself was totally demolished by the impact because it smashed into the ground once the gear fell. The tail broke off and tumbled down the runway at 200 plus miles an hour with people in it. The airplane was in a cartwheeling motion because the engine on the left wing is now running at maximum power. Like a pinwheel, it's just causing the airplane to rotate because the engine's pushing it around. When the tail broke off, the airplane is much heavier forward, so the airplane is now coming up in the air like a seesaw that somebody got off. The cockpit is getting pointed straight to the earth, and we skip like a pogo stick. The first skip, when I saw the windshield go dark brown and green and I still felt the air conditioning, we were still integral to the aircraft. The stress caused the cockpit to break off like a pencil tip. The main wreckage slammed on its back and slid into a cornfield across an active runway. Burning there. Debris everywhere. What seemed like an eternity was in fact 30 minutes before we were found. Our engineer, Dudley DeVork, was able to get his hand up through some wreckage, and somehow he drew attention to somebody driving by. The guy said, "What is this?" "It's the cockpit, there's 4 of us in here." The Air National Guard brought over a huge forklift truck with chains and tried to lift it so that the fire rescue people could climb underneath and cut us out of our seats and get us out of there. The cockpit had become so dismembered that it was basically a pile of trash. Whenever they lifted us with chains, it compacted us in tighter. We'd scream in pain because it just made it worse, so they put you back down and then try to rearrange chains. I felt a hand just tap me on the chest. "Don't worry, buddy, I got you. You're going to be fine, we got you." And salvation. My wife was home at the time. She's been married to me from the day I started pilot training in the Air Force. Whenever an airplane crash happened anywhere in the world, she would get a phone call from our friends, and the question always was, "Where's Denny?" And this time when the phone call came in, "Where's Denny?" she said, "Well, hopefully he's on his way home from Denver." Our friend said, "Oh dear God, Gina, a United DC-10 from Denver to Chicago has just crashed in Sioux City. It's on CNN." And she dropped to her knees in tears.
Tragedy in Sioux City. A United Airlines plane carrying nearly 290 people crashes at the Sioux Gateway Airport, killing some.
I never told her I was going to be on that airplane. I never said what flight I was going to be on. I could have been on the previous flight, could have been on the last flight, but she knew intuitively that was me.
The plane was en route to Chicago from Denver when it had engine trouble and later lost hydraulic
And if you
pressure.
turn on the television and see that crash, your only conclusion you could draw is, he can't be alive. Nobody could live through that.
DC-10 swooped low around Sioux City and fell.
We had friends gather, and basically it was a death watch at the house. And a phone call came in 4.5 hours later from the chaplain at Sioux City. Told my son, "Your dad's here, he's got a broken arm, he's skinned up, looks like he's going to be okay." The next day, a friend of mine got together a twin-engine airplane and got my youngest son, Brian, and my wife to Sioux City. Asked for me, and they said, "Well, he's in intensive care." No, there's got to be some mistake. We were told he had a broken arm and skinned up. That's true, he has all those injuries, but we almost lost him last night, and he's not out of the woods yet. They come into the room, and my son's 13 years old. I am black, blue, purple, green, machines, pipes, tubes, and I'm 3 times my normal size. He doesn't recognize me, he's terrified. My wife walked over to me, and I was on the morphine, and it has a lucid quality. Whenever it wears off, you're lucid for a moment before the next input. She looked at me, and I opened my eyes, and I saw her looking back at me, and she said, "Hi, I'm here. I love you. We can do this. Not you can do this, you poor slob. We can do this." The soulmate of mine was not going to let me go down. I said, "Honey, I need to know 2 things." And she said, "What is it?" And I said, "Did I make the runway?" Because our salvation was at that runway. I had to get this airplane on that runway. That's where the emergency people were. That's where the response capability was. That's where the trained personnel were. It meant everything to me. That runway was absolutely critical. And she said, "Yes, you made the runway." And with that knowledge, I had hope that even though as beat up as I was, that everybody else was okay. And my next question was just that, is everybody else okay? And she realized I didn't know the truth. And she started to cry, and I had my answer. And I cried for 3 days, every waking moment. There's 112 people that did not make it that day. Some of them I knew, some I didn't. And I would have traded gladly my life for theirs because I had the responsibility in my eyes. We as a crew were able to save 184. But the rationale that these people lived otherwise wouldn't because of our actions doesn't somehow suffice to take away these feelings. They carry black boxes on all airliners, and post-accident, they will get the information extracted from the last 30 minutes from the voice recorder and for the entire flight from the flight data recorder. They're able to load a simulator of the same type aircraft and put in the same circumstance and say, okay, now all the hydraulics are gone.
Is this back in Denver?
This is back in Denver in our training center, yeah. They had a pilot from McDonnell Douglas Corporation, one of their test pilots, and one of United's management DC-10 pilots, Gordy Carter, to see if there's some methodology that can be taught to other pilots should it happen again. They kept trying to do this in the simulator repeatedly, and they always had an unfortunate event. It would crash outside the airport by some distance. They called me after their 28th failure. Gordy was just calling to see how I was doing, how my injuries were coming along. We're in a simulator, we're trying to make this thing happen again, and boy, we just can't get it done. And they shared with me their technique, and I said, no, try this, do it this way, this way, this way, this way. You have to be more proactive, more responsive. Armed with that, they were able to get it on the ground. It still crashed, but the point was they got it to the airport. He said, we had 29 opportunities. You only had one. One lesson learned is that you can do more than you possibly believe you can. We had to. We rose above anything we believed of ourselves, and I think that translates to the human race in general, not just me. I imbue strongly on any pilot that I can. Make sure that the airplane's the way you want it. Make sure the fuel's the way you want it. Make sure that the weather conditions are the way you need it. Just take it up another notch. I didn't make a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong. None of us did. All we did as a crew was to try to mitigate one of the worst situations that have ever happened to an airplane. Just trying to make it survivable. How much did it feel if you were to be the cause? I had compression fractures of the lower back. I had broken ribs, punctured inside my right lung cavity. I had internal bleeding, massive movement of organs. My left shoulder was dislocated. My arm broke. The nerve that goes from the brain to my right hand was severed, so I effectively lost my right hand. My hand cut open and lost the tendons in my fingers. Teeth broken and cracked, facial lacerations, chunks of meat taken out of me here and there. That's basically it. My body's broken, and I'm in hospitals, I'm in surgeries, and I can't fly, and my hand doesn't work. God, am I ever going to get there? Is it ever going to happen? Finding a doctor to do this miracle surgery I need on my right arm. Where am I going to find this guy? Who is he? Can they do it? Can he make my hand work? Can I make my hands work well enough to fly again?
You really wanted to fly again?
Desperately. My doctors never believed that I ever make it back into the cockpit. I did believe. Every time they'd see me, they'd say, how you doing, Denny? And I'd say, I'm super, Doc. I'm one day closer. I'm one day closer. I knew that if I did one day, it was going to be the right day and I'd be there. They didn't have the nerve to tell me. They didn't have the heart to tell me that, no, you're not. I did not want, desperately did not want that to be my last landing, not to go out that way. And I fought with everything in my heart and my soul to get back. It's as though God looked at that airplane and said, I want you, not you, not you, you. It was so salt and pepper. Right after the accident, a lady walked up to me and stuck her finger in my chest and said, you killed my daughter. You killed my daughter. And I agreed with her. I thought that I should be dead so that she could be alive. A 9-year-old had every right to be alive. I had a life already. And about 4 years later, I was asked to speak to a group of general aviation pilots in the Chicagoland area. The host asked me if it'd be all right if one of the accident victims were in the audience. And I said, with great hesitation, yes, it'd be okay. I was chancing this again, risking again to have that happen all over. And I met her, and she's in a wheelchair. And if you had to pick a grandmother you'd want for your own, you'd pick her. She's a wonderful lady. And I bent over and I held her among all these male pilots, and I just hugged her. And in my ear, I heard her say, "Captain, I'm so glad to meet you. You are my hero." I knew her husband died next to her. And I said, "Doris, I am so glad to meet you as well. And I am so sorry that I could not save your husband." And she pushed me back gently and she said, "Bull. Captain, let it go. God wanted him." I needed permission from somebody who shared the experience, who suffered the loss, to go on. What could I have done differently? How could I have made this more successful? How could I have made it totally survivable? How could I have flown that airplane differently? Looking back on it, what would you do differently? You know, beating yourself up going back there. And you beat yourself, and it's necessary. You've got to flagellate your body. You got to beat yourself up. You have to go back and find the answer. If I did this, would this make a difference? If I did this, if I had put more power on, did less thing here, if I knew how close I was, you know, there's just a million ifs. And I've reflown that approach a million times in my mind in search of better answers. And the conclusion was, I don't think I could have done a thing different. B7 was a 727, which is a shorter walk and less work. And I love the 727. I flew it for 9,000 hours and flew all 3 seats in it. But for some reason, I walked the additional distance and got on 232, the DC-10.
Why?
That's the question I'll never know. It was to be. You pick the term that makes you comfortable, fate, chance, or luck. I had choices. I could have gone left and I could have gone right. I took the path to the left, and that was the one that took me to the DC-10. I have no idea why. You think about life, you think about what's important, you think about why you lived. If that could happen like that, where do you want to be when it does, if it does? I guarantee you that if you ever find a moment in time where you think your end is near, you will think of the people you love, and you will ask the question, where am I? And I hope you have a good answer. April 15th, 1990. I was in a DC-10 in the captain's seat, pushing back for the Honolulu. And the cabin announcement in the back is, "Today in command of your flight is Captain Denny Fitch." They didn't believe, but I did. We're taxiing out to the runway, and the tower called us and said, "If you can be ready when you get to the other runway, we have a slot. You can get you out right away." And it just like a switch went off inside. Boom. Start the engine, you do this, bang, 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 bang. We turned the corner. Before I knew it, I was pushing up the power and roaring down the runway. We shoot it over the gap. We're out over the Pacific Ocean. It all happened so fast. After we passed the point out over the water, I was climbing and things had settled down, and I realized that, oh dear God, I'm back. I'm back. I turned my head away so as not to see me cry, but I just looked heavenward and said, thanks. Thanks for letting me come back. I love what I do. I love it. I was meant to do it. I was built for it, and it's just been a true joy. I've never gone to work. I've only gone to fly.